All right, guys, this is chapter 20 of The Missing Found. Catherine was the first one to notice that Johann wasn't keeping up, that he wasn't pedaling hysterically towards home alongside her and Chip. Johann, she called over her shoulder from several bike lengths ahead. What are you doing? I have to go back, he yelled. We can't just leave Angela like that. But she's a grown-up. She told us to go. This was Chip arguing now. Johann decided he didn't have time to stand there and argue. He whirled around and began pedaling back towards the library just as desperately as he'd been pedaling away from it. Grown-ups can get kidnapped too, he thought. And she's a little nutty. She'd probably trust anyone who pretended to believe her crazy theories. Her theories are just craziness, aren't they? Johann couldn't think about that right now. He focused on trying to pedal faster. By the time he reached the library, his legs were aching and he was gasping for air. He dropped his bike on the sidewalk and slipped in the door just ahead of a mother pushing a baby stroller and holding a toddler's hand and taking infuriatingly slow steps with a play-by-play commentary. That's right, you push the button for the automatic door to open, and then the door will open, and Johann dashed through the lobby, past the check desk. Young man, no running in the library. It was a librarian, one of the women his mother always said to when she stopped in. Johann thought maybe this librarian had been in charge of story hour when he and Catherine were preschoolers. The conference room, men fighting, danger. That was all Johann could manage, with his lungs threatening to burst. To her credit, the librarian stopped yelling and sprang into action. Show me, she said. She rushed along behind Johann, practically running herself. They dashed through the stacks, past the magazine section where Catherine had hidden before, past the non-fiction shelves with all the thick books about taxes. Then finally, Johann could see the conference room, and it was empty. Angela? Johann called. He pushed his way into the conference room. Not only was the room empty, but all the chairs were lined up perfectly around the table, and the table was exactly centered in the room, as if it had never been knocked off kilter by struggling men. The window was closed. The only sign that anything had happened, there was a smudge in the glass wall, probably Johann's own fingerprints smeared against the glass when he'd scrambled out a window. Just what did you think was going on in here? The librarian asked. She had her eyebrows raised doubtfully. Just then, Johann saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head to peer out the window, and there was Angela. She was walking briskly through the far end of the parking lot. That's the woman, Johann exclaimed, the one who was in danger. While Johann was watching, Angela stepped in the cluster of pine trees on the other side of the parking lot. She turned and lifted her hand in a way that might have been a wave at Johann. Then she just vanished. Johann hadn't known that it would look like that. He'd heard Catherine's description of the janitor appearing and disappearing. He'd heard Angela's description of the plane doing the same thing. But he hadn't understood how strange it would be, how it would set every nerve in his body on edge and make him question all sorts of basic tenets about how the world worked. Could gravity be tampered with too? Could time? Johann blinked and stared and stammered. But, and then he at least had the sense to shut his mouth because the librarian was looking at him oddly. Already his brain was trying to supply explanations for him. She just stepped behind a tree. You just blinked and thought you saw something odd. The same kind of explanations he'd tried to use to account for Catherine's story, for Angela's. The kind of explanations anyone else, casually glancing out a window, would have accepted without a second thought. But his glance hadn't been casual. He knew he hadn't blinked, not while Angela was disappearing. He understood now what Angela had meant when she had said, I know what I saw. I trust my own eyes. The scene had been clear and distinct, and he really had seen Angela vanish into thin air. Where is this woman? Angela asked. I don't quite see. She's gone. The librarian narrowed her eyes at him and tilted her head suspiciously. So, what is this? She asked. A dare? Your audition for drama club? If so, I heartily recommend you for whatever part you were trying out for, because you really had me convinced. You had me running through the library. I wasn't lying, Johann protested. There really were two men in here fighting, and they seemed dangerous, and... The librarian tapped her chin, her eyes narrowing further. How did you see what was going on in this conference room before you ran in the front door? She asked. Through the glass? From outside? Johann said, which did have a grain of truth to it. Still, his words came out sounding like a question. Someone did mention that they had thought they heard a girl scream back here, but we thought it was just one of those computer games. The librarian seemed to be talking mostly to herself. She reached out and grabbed Johann's arm. Come with me. We'll do a search of the library, and you tell me if you've seen either of those men. Meekly, Johann let himself be led through the magazine section, past the row of computers, past the reference desk, through the little kid section where the mother of the toddler was asking with exaggerated patience, what will it be? Curious George or the cat in the hat? In the YA section, some kids from school were playing on the computers, and they pointed and giggled when they saw Johann being paraded around with his arm trapped in a librarian's grip. I don't see either of the men now, Johann said, his face burning with shame. He just wanted to get out of the library, away from the librarian. You could see Chip and Catherine standing hesitantly by the front door, as if they weren't sure if they needed to come and rescue him or not. The librarian let go of his arm. I think you did see something, she muttered. You really were looking carefully for those men. And Johann had been. Even when the kids from school were laughing at him, he made sure he peered down every aisle between the bookshelves, every nook of the little kid reading area. The men were nowhere in sight. Oh well, Johann said, trying very hard to keep his voice from shaking. Nothing's wrong now. Can I just go? The librarian regarded him thoughtfully. Go on, then, she said. No one could feel her eyes on him as he went to join Chip and Catherine. Walking out the door, he felt robotic because his body was doing something so normal. One foot stepping in front of the other, hands held out to shove against the door while his mind was zipping and zooming and alighting on one strange thought after another. What happened? Catherine said. Is Angela okay? Johann had to struggle so hard to focus his mind, to concentrate on the one precise moment of memory that his brain kept trying to transfer into something normal and acceptable, something that would fit with everything else he already knew about the world. He wouldn't let his brain do that. He wouldn't stop trusting his own eyes. I saw Angela, Johann said. I don't know if she was okay or not. I think she went into a time warp. And that's the end of chapter 20. Have a good day.